Welcome everybody to this week's episode of Future Strong, episode 15. And Lindsay, Pollock and I are delighted to welcome you. My name's Nikki Garchea and I'm the co-founder and chief customer officer at Capfinity. Capfinity is a global organization that supports students and employers to help talent from recruitment through to development. And we are delighted for this episode to have great representation from the UK and US, esteemed representation with Shawn VanDerziel from NACE and Stephen Isherwood from ISE, and we'll let them introduce themselves fully shortly. Lindsay, if you would let everyone know a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Nikki. I'm so delighted to be here. Welcome to all of our viewers today. Thanks for joining us. My name is Lindsay Pollock. I'm a career and workplace author and speaker. My latest book is Recalculating, Navigate Your Career Through the Changing World of Work. Such a proud friend and ambassador to Capfinity and a member of NACE and a speaker for ISE. So I'm so happy to be here with you today. We are here to talk about the similarities and differences in the career services and early career hiring across the pond. This is not, as it might seem, an advertisement for glasses, as we were joking before. We are all here representing our big spectacles, but just so delighted to be here with all of you. And we've got Trudy Steinfeld in the house saying hello to everybody. Trudy, thank you for watching. Stephen, I would love to pass it to you to introduce yourself and then over to Shawn. Stephen.
Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks, Nikki. So my name's Steve Isherwood. So I lead an organisation called the ISE, Institute of Student Employers, UK-based. We are similar to NACE, but we focus more on the employer side. In the UK, for those outside the UK, we have ISE that's employer-led, and we also have another organisation called AGCAS that's universities-led. Having said that, we've got nearly 100 universities that are members, so we're a pretty broad church within the ISE.
Great. Shawn.
Hi, everyone. So great to be here. I'm Shawn VanDerziel, Executive Director of the National Association of Colleges and Employers, otherwise known as NACE. NACE is a membership association representing 13,000 professionals who work in career development career centers at over 2,000 colleges and universities here in the US and beyond, as well as talent acquisition professionals that work at over 1,000 employers here in the US that recruit new college graduates for employment. And I'm just delighted to be here and looking forward to our discussion today.
Thank you so much, the two of you. We wanted, first of all, just for listeners to hear a little bit about the similarities and differences between the hiring of emerging talent individuals in the US and UK. And Shawn, we appreciate you're new to your role. We're not going to grill you too hard on the differences. We're going to hand that to Stephen, who's a dear friend of mine. So we're happy to grill him second. But would you tell us a little bit, Shawn, just about hiring in the US and some of the things that are critical to the NACE members?
Sure. So a connection between career centers and employers for that college recruiting is so critically important. And one of the things that has really emerged here in the US is the importance of internships. And so our research even shows that when an employer is looking for a key differential for the best candidates, they are looking first and foremost for internship experience from their candidates. So a large emphasis has been placed on our internship programs here in the US, and it's continuing to grow, both as for credit programs as well within a college university system, and then from the employer perspective for both branding purposes as well as pipeline purposes into the organization. Diversity and inclusion has been critically important here in the US. And so our employers are busy developing plans to diversify their organizations so that they have a pipeline of individuals that are representative of their communities and who they want to be. And so we're finding a lot of emphasis on diversity and inclusion as well at the moment.
Brilliant. Thank you, Shawn. And Stephen, if you could just share a little bit from your perspective in the UK market and anything thematically that you think kind of differentiates what we do in the UK with the US.
Sure. I'll echo some of the themes that Shawn says are important. So I'll come back to those in a sec. I think two of the key difference in the UK market, particularly at the graduate level, is I think the UK is a bit more generalist than the US and other territories around the world. So not many employers recruit by subject discipline. 85%, according to our data, don't stipulate a degree discipline. They also don't place much of a premium on a master's students. I mean, they recruit master's students, but they bring them onto the same programs as their graduates. I mean, I know that from my own experience. Prior to taking this role, I've been doing this job for about 8 years now, but I used to head up student recruitment for EY in the UK and Ireland. And people doing accountancy, we didn't mind what degree they did. We recruited engineers, lawyers, psychologists, whereas I know in the US, if you haven't done a very specific degree, you just can't apply for the job. You have to go back and start again almost. So I think that's quite a big difference, and that drives lots of different behaviours from employers, I think, when you compare the two different markets. But having said that, worked very similar cycles. It's interesting hearing when talk about the word internship. I think back over my career, we never used to use that word at all. Employers only used to really care about people in their final year at university, and you get a small number in on maybe a good summer scheme, as we used to call them. So a vacation scheme was a phrase we used to use, whereas actually employers go much earlier in the cycle now. We do use that word internship all the time, and I think that is something that we've seen sort of shift over the Atlantic. The other big change in going earlier is, and this has been very UK government driven, is we have a thing called the apprentice levy, which means that employers pay effectively a payroll tax, but they can then offset some of that tax if they hire people onto apprentice programs. And often they'll be school leavers, but again, there are graduate degree level apprentice programs. That's why we changed our name. We used to be called the AGR, Association of Graduate Recruiters, but the word graduate just limited too much in terms of representing what we did, whereas all our employers talk about early talent, they talk about students. So the market is broader in that sense. I'd say nearly all our employers now have diversified early talent programs. Most of the action is still in the graduate space, but a third to a quarter of vacancies, depending on the employer, will also be for non-graduates.
So interesting how the terminology has changed over the years in all of our fields. I wonder if COVID will be another catalyst for some of the changes in that area around the globe. Shawn, I want to move to a topic that I know is top of mind for everybody right now, especially the students themselves. And I want to give a shout out to Fred Burke from Baruch College Zicklin School of Business, who has just joined us and is such a loyal fan and former guest. Hi, Fred. Shawn, how's the outlook looking for the class of 2021? And I'm wondering if you can put it in context. I know you weren't in your role at this period of time, but Stephen, you and I have talked a lot about comparisons between this year and the global financial crisis. And then the class of 2008 sort of slid into their roles, but 2009 was hit really hard. So can you talk about how hiring is looking for 2021 and maybe how that compares to the class of 2020? What's the outlook?
Sure. So we're still studying the class of 2020 to understand what really happened. We know that unemployment currently for the traditional age postgraduate student, so 24 around years old, is around 10% here in the US right now. So it is a large percent, and it's about double what it would have been 1 year ago. And that has maintained pretty much throughout all of COVID. It started out really high at the beginning of the year. It was more meaning right after COVID started in May, June. Unemployment for graduates in that 21 to 24 age range was around 20%. So it's gone down over time, but it's still really high. Large employers are telling us that they'll hire about just over 7% more new graduates this year than they did from last year's graduating class. And in the fall, they were telling us it was going to be a little bleaker. They were thinking it was going to be just slightly down. So there has been a shift just from the fall to the spring, which is good. Employers are being pretty optimistic right now. 63% of employers are telling us that they're going to maintain their hires from last year. 29% are saying that they're going to increase the numbers from what they did with the last graduating class, and 8% are saying that they will decrease it. So the industries that are showing increases are really in information services, computer and electronics manufacturing. Those might not be surprises. And we're also seeing a shift and a more positive outlook from the fall for industries like engineering services, as well as the retail sector.
Oh, that's great news on the retail sector. Stephen, how about in the UK? What's the outlook for 2021?
Broadly similar, actually. So when we look at last year's data, overall vacancies were down between 10 and 15% in general. But then, of course, some sectors were hit much harder. We're just in the middle of crunching some data at the moment, so I need to be careful, or Tristram, our research officer, will shoot me for talking about data before it's actually finalised in the public field. But actually, what I've seen so far, it broadly replicates what Shawn's saying, which is roughly half of our members are saying that they expect to hire roughly the same as last year, and then a good chunk saying they're going to be increased. There's still a bit of retraction in some sectors and businesses that are hit particularly hard, but actually a much more positive picture than I think we thought we'd be facing a few months ago in the autumn. I think it's interesting you mentioned the financial crash. I think one of the differences this cycle compared to the financial crash is that in the UK, at least in the graduate market, the small and medium-sized enterprises, they didn't really skip a beat in terms of hiring. They continued to hire in strong numbers. It was some of the big employers that pulled back, whereas in the UK, at least, a lot of smaller businesses have been hit particularly hard. So I think whilst the larger, more structured graduate programs have not been hit too badly, actually the overall labour market for graduates is a lot tougher than it was 10 years ago because of that SME sector.
It's interesting to hear the similarities and some of these differences as well. One of the things I'm also interested in is my colleague Jeannie Lycaris and Trudy Steinfeld, who's dialed in, often talk about how even in a recession there are jobs that are hard to fill. Do either of you find from career services or from your members that there are these jobs that students just don't seem attracted to or know about? I'd be keen to, Shawn, I don't know if you hear of this.
I don't have any specifics to point you towards right now, but what I can say is what we are finding is that there has been probably a change to the approach of jobs that students are needing to take because of the labor market. So it's one of those areas where our career service professionals are helping to work with students to help them to broaden their perspective on the labor market in general. So as these students, graduates from the class of 2020 or the current class going through, we're thinking, hey, I've got, I'm going to go into this kind of job in this type of industry. The fact of the matter is that industry may not be hiring right now, and they might not for a while. Yeah. But there are jobs out there, and there actually are a lot of jobs out there. They just might not be in the industry or that specific job that you originally thought you might be going for. And so it's helping students to really broaden their perspective on what those opportunities may be, which is, so for us, it's really important to help students to understand and to catalog their own skills and their own competencies so that they understand what they can bring to the table and how they can leverage those skills and competencies for a whole range of jobs that may be actually available and that they'll be really happy in.
Yeah. It's great advice, and I'm thinking of the new competency framework, which I think you've launched recently, that would help students. And Lindsay, this speaks to recalculating as well. Quite frankly, there's a lot of it going on. Stephen, what about you? Any particular jobs that you find aren't necessarily the ones that people are attracted to or go unfilled?
Not yet. I think we're a little bit too early to tell. It was definitely a feature of the financial crash. When I look back at our old data from then, I think nearly 50% of what was the AGR at the time, employee members didn't fill all their vacancies. They're not telling that yet. I think the market, because it is much tighter, as we were saying a few minutes ago, I think we're hearing employers having to, close vacancies earlier because they're getting so many applications through, etc. I think what's going to be interesting though is as we come out of out of the pandemic, if we do see a strong bounce back in hiring, I think some employers are a little bit worried that they might see a number of reneges, where people, may have chosen a location that wasn't quite their first job or the place they wanted to work. They might keep looking. So I think there's a nervousness around that. And if there is a big uptick in vacancies, particularly if employers need to recruit in to short deadlines, I think some of those, what are perceived as less attractive locations to work in, or industries that don't get quite the same airtime as other industries, I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see that. So we'll keep an eye out for it, but I'm not seeing any data yet.
Thank you.
So I'd love to turn to our career services listeners and viewers. Shawn, I'll start with you. I know it's more part of NACE than ISE. Both of you are planning your big conferences coming up in June of this year, and that's really an opportunity to see what people are applying to speak about, what people's interest areas are. What would you say are the hottest topics on the minds of career services professionals that you're hearing from a NACE perspective? I think you're on mute. It happens once a show. Thank you for getting that over with for us.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, our career service members are really busy trying to help students prepare for this, their expectations of hiring, and the concept that I was just illustrating around skills and competencies, and taking those inventories to help and both the higher education ecosystem, so meaning their own campuses, to understand skills and competencies to help those students with their outcomes towards graduation. So they're really looking deeply at those concepts and how to really help students to exploit their skills and competencies. But they're also taking a look internally to look at what is the go forward for virtual versus in-person kinds of activities. There's still a lot of uncertainty that's happening. And our career service professionals are concerned because they want, and they know that the in-person interactions are much deeper. There's a lot more engagement that's happening. But the fact of the matter is that there is trepidation about that. And we don't know how much employers are really going to be able to do in person come the fall. So there's a lot of planning and thought being put into this. The final thing would be around diversity and inclusion topics, making sure that we are, from a career services perspective, being as inclusive as possible to ensure that opportunities exist for all, and that they are equitable. And so really helping to review those employers to ensure that they have equitable practices in place, as well as ensuring that the students who are being served are all being served and all gaining the advantages needed to be fully employed.
And I just want to say bravo to NACE. You have been absolutely on top of putting out content for career services professionals on DEI practices. The HBCU Summit was fantastic. I think you've really stepped up in that area, and it's really admirable. As has ISE. Stephen, I know you work more on the employer side, but you certainly talk to universities all the time. What are you hearing are the top of mind topics in career services over in the UK?
Very similar to Shawn, actually. The diversity inclusion piece really top of the agenda at the moment. And that's how students from all backgrounds with disadvantage, but particularly Black heritage students, there's lots of good evidence how employers have been able to cast their net wider by the use of technology and platforms. But then there's also this concern that I've already mentioned, the considerable increase in vacancies, lots of students getting a lot more reject messages. Where are the numbers landing? Are we seeing a difference to intakes? And I think the agenda's changed on for both employers and universities. There's much more focus on representation. Students seeing people that look like them, that they can relate to when they're talking to employers. And how can career services make sure that employers are getting those people to talk to their students? And this real focus, and I think this is a good thing, there's a lot more pressure on numbers. So we'd all been working in the D&I space for a very long period of time. It has been a priority for a long period. But I think that actually some of that frustration is coming out now, which is, but why aren't the numbers changing? You know, why have we still got these divisions? So I think there's a lot more focus on actual outcomes, which is a good thing. And of course, the other piece is the hybrid piece. You know, again, there's been lots of really good learning. Some things have worked really well, particularly more niche, more focused events. The bigger events probably less so from what people tell me. So I know career services are thinking around, you know, what's that careers fair type model? Everybody generally is working on the assumption that the autumn we will still be virtual, although there's a bit of uncertainty. But yeah, what worked, what hasn't, how can we modify, you know, going forward into that autumn term? How can we make the best use of data? What sits on, you know, a university sort of platform, and then what sits on an employer platform? So yeah, lots of conversations around what that might look like, and how we can take the learnings, you know, from the last sort of 6 months of attraction activity and build on that for the next season.
All right, I'm going to be the first to go off script. Nikki, it's always me, but I'm going off script. Stephen, I want to push you on this. Fall will likely be hybrid, virtual. Who do you think is going to blink first? Because I feel like every single conversation I have had with every employer is, well, we're going to wait and see. We're going to wait and see. So what do you think is going to happen? How do you think we're going to get back to more of an in-person model? Is it just when the calendar turns to 2022? Do you think one industry is going to go first? I would love to hear Shawn and Nikki, all of your perspectives on this. But Nikki and I have spoken to 80 employers over the past year, and nobody sort of is willing to be the first. So what do you think is going to happen to actually get us back to being on campus, if that happens at all?
I think it'll be market forces. I think there's two things at play here. One is actually, you know, within organizations, there's people health and safety. That's the first consideration. There's also, you know, we talk about budgets. You know, people have been able to bank some quite big savings on budgets, and finance directors are going to be reluctant to release those budgets, you know, at least in the short term. But then, you know, if I can think of, you know, two big competitive law firms, if one starts getting traction on campus and the other thinks, oh, they're getting, you know, better students, we need to follow suit. That will drive changes behaviors very quickly. I'll give you a quick example. It's not in the attraction space, but it's in internships. For the very first time last week, I heard two employers say that they are thinking of doing face-to-face internships this summer. And all of us on the call went, "You've got to be kidding, really?" And it's market forces have driven it. It's no coincidence that the two of them were investment banks. There's lots of noise in the UK about investment banks saying, no, we want to get back in the office. It's important for our culture. So the recruiters I was talking to are getting real pressure from the business saying, you've got to get people in the building. We want internships and inductions face-to-face. And they're the ones having to kind of put a dose of realism there. So yeah, market forces is what I think will be the ultimate driver. If that's how you get the best candidates, that's what you're going to do.
Just to throw one thing in, I'm curious because Stephen used to work here. PwC last week came out and said people can work from home as long as they need to. And I just wondered if you had any reflection on market forces may also drive things the other way.
Yeah, I think it will. So it's going to be really interesting to look at those sectors like banking, you know, if they're not good, because can they retain and attract the best employees? And if the best employees want a different, more flexible working model, they're going to have to respond to that, because otherwise they'll lose talent. And they're already facing challenges from a lot of the, you know, particularly the tech sector. So I'm quite surprised by this debate in that sector at the moment, because it seems to be against the grain of where everybody else is going. Everybody else I talk to is talking about much more flexible approaches to working.
I personally believe that we've had a paradigm shift in virtual and in-person experiences. And I think the virtual experiences, at least here in the US, are here to stay. And at what level, I'm not exactly sure, but I can give you some information on what our employers are telling us for the fall. Basically, 70% of them are telling us they still don't know if they're going to have any ability to travel in the fall at all, because their corporations have not given that information. So it may be too late if they don't know until midsummer or late summer if they can travel to actually make those plans and have that happen, right? So for the fall, as an example, I think you're going to find lots of virtual experiences still happening. Our employers are basically telling us that they are 30% of them are saying they want exclusively virtual experience for the fall. And 46% of them are saying a hybrid approach. So take those two numbers, that's 76% are saying that they need a virtual experience, for instance, for career fairs. And that also extends to other kinds of things that they may traditionally have done on campus, that most are saying they have a need to be able to do things virtually. And so there is a lot of pressure. And I can also tell you that from an internship perspective, from the virtual environment, the vast majority of our employers are going to do those again virtually. This summer, 80% of them will be virtual in some format. The ones that aren't are largely in manufacturing, and there are only about 14% that are telling us that they're going to be exclusively in person for this summer. I think it's going to be a slow draw to get back to in person. I think in person will happen, and we will eventually get back to probably a better balance of it. But I think in the fall, we're going to find still a pretty strong virtual presence.
I think we certainly need to prepare ourselves for something that is going to feel choppy. People kind of talk about the hybrid model like it's going to be one seamless, train of activity alongside each other. And I think that we probably need to prepare ourselves that we might go back in person to a career fair. If one single thing happens that jeopardizes that as an employer, then the game will change again. So I think we've got to get used to the sort of the move forward, move back, as we try and navigate what will be different.
I'd agree with that, Nikki. So I was going to say, one of the things I've heard from a couple of employees is saying Plan B is a reality now. Plan B used to be kind of not really Plan B. Plan B is a meaningful plan that can be put into action very quickly now.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Jada Green from Accenture said, we will always have a Plan B ready to go, no matter what. And I think that makes a lot of sense.
It would be great to, as we come to the end of the session, just to hear a little bit about the themes of the upcoming conferences that you both are running and what's driven those agendas. I'm guessing a lot of what we've discussed here, but Shawn, maybe first, if you would tell us a little bit about the things that are occupying your membership and what's driven some of the things you're covering off in the conference. You're on mute again, Shawn. I know you're not quiet.
No, I know. So we'll have a strong emphasis on diversity and inclusion topics, which will be driven through all of our tracks that we have for recruiting on college campuses with our university partners, as well as for our employers. That has come out very clear in all the proposals that those folks have submitted. Competencies and skills is another area that has risen to the top in terms of themes. And I would echo Stephen earlier was talking about analytics and data and this need for really proofing out what it is that you're doing and being very deliberate in what you're doing and measuring both of those things that I just illustrated on diversity and inclusion, skills and competencies, et cetera, as well as a whole host of other questions and issues. So those will be some of the top things, but we will certainly have the whole range of the recruiting program.
Thanks, Shawn. And Stephen, what about you?
One of the great things about working so closely with NACE is actually we talked about the differences at the start of the program, but actually there's lots of things in our markets where we're very closely aligned, and there's great learnings, I think, happening between the two markets and transfer of knowledge. So I'd agree with all the things Shawn said. We've got stuff on the new skills piece. Is that going to cause a shift? We talked about hybrid working. As that becomes a reality, what does that mean for hires? One of the other things that we're also going to be talking about actually is how you can continue to do, high volume, meaningful campus attraction, but on tighter budgets, or how can smaller organizations who don't have the big budgets, how can they just be as effective on campus? And what role does new technology place within all that? And again, I think that big emphasis on data, everything that we've been talking about, how can you drive change? How can you understand performance improvements, ROI, by looking at data and analytics? Because everybody tells us that, again, that's one of the benefits of the pandemic, there's a lot more data coming in now, and they can make better strategic decisions based on that data. So we're having a lot of conversations around that as well.
Fab. And you've got an interesting keynote, Stephen, haven't you?
Yes, somebody called Lindsay has got a book out apparently. I think she's coming along to say a few words to us.
I heard some of those words the other day. They were absolutely brilliant. I took notes, even though I was co-presenting with her. It was brilliant. Lindsay, would you round up and introduce next week's guest? And I will just take an opportunity to thank Shawn and Stephen for giving up their time, but also covering such wide-ranging topics. I feel much more positive listening to the two of you around the future, the way in which your members will be supported, and actually our capacity as individuals in this space to help the students and the career services navigate what is going to continue to be interesting times. But over to you, Lindsay.
Beautifully said. Longtime listeners will be happy that my train is going by. I think we just missed the loud blaring.
Yeah.
You did. I was like, keep going, keep talking, keep talking. Yes, in 2 weeks' time, we have Jada Green. Is that right? Gemma Elson?
Gemma Elson, yeah.
Gemma Elson.
From Fidelity. I just think
in
it's
2 weeks' time. Thank you.
Perfect.
You were testing me. Thank you. We have Gemma Elson of Fidelity in the UK. She's going to be joined by Derek Brown of Entrepreneurs in Action, which they've done a really phenomenal DEI program of recruiting in difficult to recruit areas in the UK. So looking forward to that in 2 weeks. I was really kind of pushing on social media an epic US-UK smackdown, but the reality is that there's so much collaboration and so much value on both sides of the pond. I'm just overwhelmed. And I think what you've also both demonstrated is just the value of professional associations, that we're all kind of in our silos doing our own thing, but we need these communities of people globally to share what's going on. I mean, the data that you've shared really puts all of this in context of where the trends are going and what each of us in our own organizations have to do. So thank you for your work and for your organizations. I'll give you just a minute to say a final few words. Stephen, why don't you go first, and then Shawn.
And really thanks for hosting us. It's been a great session, and we are very much looking forward to having you speak at our conference, Lindsay. I agree. I mean, I agree that associations like ours have a very important role to play. Particularly, I mean, we've seen there's been a financial impact on our organisation, but our usage rates have gone up by 400-500%. That's a huge increase in take-up, and that's because people need data, they need analysis, they need help, they need networks. So I think that's again something that we really want to keep going as we come out of this pandemic. And it's always good to work with Shawn. No slapdown needed.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I would echo everything that Stephen said. And the power of associations is seen every day. And the importance of career services is more important now than it ever has been. And our employers, to your earlier points around, changes from economic downturns of the past to now, branding and keeping up the college recruiting functions was critically important through this pandemic, and did not take the downturn that it has in similar circumstances in the past, economic circumstances. And so having an association to go to be able to collect this data, to understand where people are going and what they're doing collectively has proven a lot of value. And I'm just feel really honored to be a part of it. And thanks again for having me here today.
Thank you all.